The text message arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jolting me awake in my penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor. I read it twice before the words fully registered. Emma, don't come to Grandpa's funeral tomorrow. This is family only. We know you're busy with your little job anyway. Mom. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back simply, I understand. Setting my phone aside, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city I'd helped reshape over the past decade. The morning sun cast long shadows between the buildings, several of which bore the discreet logo of Sterling Development Group, my company. In the distance I could see the construction cranes working on the new medical center that would bear Grandpa's name, though my family would never know that. My phone buzzed with another message from my assistant Marcus. Mrs. Sterling, the board meeting is confirmed for 9 a.m. Also, Riverside Memorial called about the final arrangements for your grandfather's service. I typed back, handle the board meeting. I need to make a call. Grandpa had passed 3 days ago at Willowbrook Care Center, the most expensive private facility in the state. For the past 3 years I'd been covering his monthly costs of $18,000, plus all his medical expenses, medications and the round-the-clock private nurses he'd needed after his stroke. The family thought Medicare was handling everything. They had no idea that I'd been the one ensuring he had the best possible care, the finest room gourmet meals prepared by a chef, and access to experimental treatments that had given us almost 2 extra years together. I dialed the number for Riverside Memorial, the funeral home where I'd already arranged everything. Mrs. Sterling, came the familiar voice of Richard Blackwood, the funeral director. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your grandfather was a remarkable man. Thank you, Richard. I need to ask about the arrangements. Has my family contacted you yet? There was a pause. Yes, ma'am. Your mother called yesterday afternoon. She seemed surprised by some of the details. What did she say? Well, she asked about costs, and when I explained that everything had been prearranged and paid for by Sterling Holdings, she became quite agitated. She insisted there must be some mistake, that no one in the family had those kinds of resources. I closed my eyes. Of course they'd assumed it was a charity case or some kind of error. What did you tell her? I simply confirmed that all arrangements had been made according to your specifications. The viewing tonight, the service tomorrow at St. Michael's Cathedral, the reception at the Harbor Club afterward. She asked me to scale everything back to something more appropriate for their budget. My jaw tightened. And what did you say? I explained that the services were fully paid for and couldn't be changed without authorization from the account holder. She demanded to know who that was, but I told her I couldn't release that information without proper documentation. Good. Stick to that policy. Mrs. Sterling, there's something else. Your mother mentioned that you wouldn't be attending. She said it was family only. The irony wasn't lost on me. The granddaughter who'd spent countless hours at Grandpa's bedside, who'd held his hand during his final moments, who'd listened to his stories and preserved his war medals and photographs, I wasn't considered family enough to attend his funeral. I'm aware of their position, I said carefully. Ma'am, if I may, your grandfather spoke about you constantly. About how proud he was of what you'd accomplished, how you were the only one who really understood him. I think he'd want you there. My throat tightened. Grandpa had been the only family member who'd never questioned my choices, never tried to change me, never made me feel like I wasn't enough. When I told him about my business success, he'd simply smiled and said, I always knew you had steel in your spine, kiddo. Richard, I want you to do me a favor. When my family arrives for the viewing tonight, don't mention my involvement unless they ask directly. Let them think it's an administrative oversight or something. Of course, Mrs. Sterling. Though I have to warn you, when they see the service you've arranged, they're going to have questions. I imagine they will. After hanging up, I spent the morning in back-to-back meetings, reviewing quarterly reports for my real estate empire that now included 12 major commercial developments, 43 residential properties, and a construction company that employed over 800 people. My CFO, Patricia Henley, noticed my distraction. Emma, everything all right? You seem off today. My grandfather's funeral is tomorrow. Oh, I'm so sorry. Do you need to reschedule anything? I hesitated. Actually, I won't be attending. Patricia's eyebrows shot up. What? Why not? Family politics. She stared at me for a moment, then gathered her papers. You know what? Reschedule everything anyway. Take the time you need. Patricia, it's fine. Emma, you've worked every day for the past 5 years except when you had pneumonia, and even then you were answering emails from the hospital. Take the damn day. That evening I found myself driving slowly past St. Michael's Cathedral, where warm lights spilled from the windows. Cars filled the parking lot, more than I'd expected. Grandpa had touched many lives during his 87 years. I parked across the street and sat in my Tesla watching people I recognized file in and out of the building. Neighbors from his old street, members of his veterans group, former co-workers from the factory where he'd worked for 40 years. My phone rang. Richard Blackwood. Mrs. Sterling, I thought you should know. Your family just left the viewing. How did it go? Well, your mother spent most of the time asking everyone if they knew who'd paid for the arrangements. She seemed particularly upset about the flowers. I smiled despite myself. I'd ordered white lilies and red roses, Grandpa's favorites, arranged in a display that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She also asked me 3 more times about the costs. When I showed her the itemized bill, she went very quiet. How much did you show her? The total? $47,000 for everything. The viewing, the service, the cathedral rental, the reception, the burial plot, the headstone. She asked if there was payment plan available. My heart ached. $47,000 was less than I spent on a typical business lunch for investors. Mrs. Sterling? Your brother was there too. I think. He kept asking about the military honors ceremony you arranged. What did he say? He wanted to know how we'd gotten approval for the full honor guard from the naval base. I told him it required significant advance planning and connections. Grandpa had served on a destroyer in the Pacific during World War II, but the family had never known the details of his service. I'd spent months working with military historians to piece together his record, discovering that he'd earned 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart. The Navy had been honored to provide full military honors for the service. Richard, did my nephew show up? Danny, the college boy, he was there. Seemed very emotional. He kept talking about how much your grandfather meant to him. Danny was my brother Jake's son, 20 years old and struggling to pay for school. He'd been Grandpa's favorite great-grandchild, and Grandpa had been secretly worried about the boy's future. I'd been anonymously covering Danny's tuition for the past 2 years, but I'd never told Grandpa that. Mrs. Sterling, I have to ask, are you sure about not attending tomorrow? I've arranged for a section to be reserved just in case. I watched an elderly man in a Navy uniform walking slowly toward the cathedral, probably one of Grandpa's old shipmates. I'll think about it. But even as I said it, I knew I wouldn't go. My family had made their position clear. I wasn't welcome at the funeral of the man who'd been more like a father to me than my own father ever was. I drove home and spent the evening going through the photo albums Grandpa had given me last year. Pictures of him as a young sailor, his wedding to Grandma, their early years together. Photos of my dad as a child, then my uncle, then eventually me and my siblings. In one photo, Grandpa and I were sitting on his porch when I was maybe 8 years old. He was teaching me to play chess, both of us completely absorbed in the game. On the back, in his careful handwriting, Emma, my little strategist. She's going to run the world someday. I was still looking at photos when my phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Unknown number. Hello. Emma? It's Danny. My nephew's voice was thick with tears. Danny? What's wrong? I'm at the funeral home. I couldn't sleep, so I came back to sit with Grandpa for a while. They said I could stay for a few minutes. That's okay, honey. Take all the time you need. Emma, something weird is happening. Mom and Dad keep talking about who paid for all this. They're saying it doesn't make sense, that someone must have made a mistake. I stayed quiet. The funeral director guy, he showed them some bills. Emma, the flowers alone cost more than Dad makes in a month. And they're saying someone arranged for military honors, which apparently is really expensive and hard to get. Your great-grandfather was a war hero, Danny. He deserved full honors. But who? Emma, did you know Grandpa was in the Navy? Like really in the Navy? Not just regular service. What do you mean? There's a display case here with his medals. Bronze Stars, Emma. And some kind of citation for bravery. I never knew any of this. My throat tightened. I'd spent months tracking down his military records, working with the Veterans Administration to get copies of commendations that had been lost over the decades. Grandpa never talked about the war much. Emma, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you really not coming tomorrow? As I know how much you meant to him. He talked about you all the time. Danny. He told me once that you were the only one who really saw him. Not just as an old man but as who he really was. He said you understood him in a way that even his own kids didn't. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Your parents made it clear that I'm not welcome. That's bullshit, Emma. You're more family than any of us. Danny, language. I'm 20 years old, I can say bullshit. And I'm right. Whatever's going on with Mom and Dad, whatever they think about your life choices, Grandpa loved you. He'd want you there. After I hung up, I sat in my living room staring out at the city lights. At 2 a.m. I made a decision. I called Richard Blackwood's emergency line. Mrs. Sterling? Is everything all right? Richard, I want to make one change to tomorrow's arrangements. Of course. What do you need? I want to add something to the reception. I want to set up a scholarship fund in Grandpa's name. Full college scholarships for military descendants who demonstrate financial need. That's a beautiful gesture. What amount were you thinking? Start with $2 million. We'll add more as needed. There was silence on the other end. Mrs. Sterling, did you say $2 million? That's correct. I want to announce it at the reception tomorrow. Let people know that Grandpa's legacy will live on through education. Ma'am, I have to ask, will you be there to make the announcement? I thought about Danny's words, about the photos scattered around my living room, about the man who'd believed in me when no one else did. Yes, I said finally. I'll be there. The next morning I chose my outfit carefully. A simple black dress, not too expensive looking, paired with the pearl necklace Grandpa had given me for my college graduation. The one he'd bought with his Social Security check because he wanted me to have something special. I arrived at the cathedral just as the service was beginning, slipping into the reserved section Richard had prepared. From where I sat, I could see my family in the front row, my parents, my brother Jake and his wife, Danny, my uncle and his family. The service was beautiful. The pastor spoke about Grandpa's quiet dignity, his service to his country, his love for his family. The military honor guard performed with precision and respect, folding the flag with care that brought tears to everyone's eyes. When they handed the flag to my mother, I saw her surprise. She'd had no idea about the depth of his military service. At the reception at the Harbor Club afterward, I watched my family move through the elegant space with wide eyes. The club was one of the most exclusive venues in the city, with panoramic views of the harbor and a reputation for hosting only the most important events. I stayed in the background letting them process everything. The gourmet catering, the professional photography, the string quartet playing Grandpa's favorite songs. Everything I'd arranged to honor a man who'd lived simply but deserved to be celebrated magnificently. Danny spotted me first. He broke away from a group of Grandpa's old Navy buddies and rushed over. Emma. You came. I couldn't miss it, I said, hugging him tightly. Emma. I turned to see my mother approaching, her face a mixture of confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. Mom. I thought you weren't coming. I changed my mind. She looked around the elegant reception space, then back at me. Emma, do you know anything about all this? Before I could answer, Richard Blackwood approached with a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. The room quieted as people turned toward him. We're gathered here today not just to mourn the loss of James Mitchell, but to celebrate a life well lived. A man who served his country with honor, raised his family with love and touched countless lives with his quiet wisdom. He paused, looking directly at me. James often spoke about legacy, not the material things we leave behind but the impact we have on others. In that spirit, his granddaughter Emma would like to share something special. My family's heads snapped toward me in unison. My mother's face went pale. I took the microphone with steady hands. My grandfather taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. He also taught me that when you're blessed with resources, you have a responsibility to use them well. I looked out at the room full of people who'd loved him. That's why I'm announcing the establishment of the James Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund. Starting immediately, this fund will provide full college scholarships to descendants of military veterans who demonstrate financial need. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. The initial endowment is $2 million, with additional funding to be added annually to ensure this program continues in perpetuity. The room erupted in applause. I saw Danny's eyes fill with tears, saw several of Grandpa's old Navy friends nodding with approval. My mother was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. When the applause died down, I continued. My grandfather believed that everyone deserves a chance to build something meaningful with their lives. This scholarship will ensure that financial barriers don't prevent young people from pursuing their dreams. I handed the microphone back to Richard and made my way through the crowd accepting condolences and congratulations. But I kept my eye on my family, who had gathered in a tight cluster near the windows. Finally, my father approached me. Emma, we need to talk. Of course. He led me to a quiet corner of the room. $2 million, Emma? Yes. Where did that money come from? I looked at him steadily. From me. From you. Emma, you work in, what is it, marketing? I work in real estate development. Real estate. He paused, processing. Emma, exactly what do you do in real estate? I develop it. My mother joined us, her face still shocked. Emma, this reception. The flowers, the military honors, everything. Do you know how much all this costs? About $47,000. And you know this because? Because I paid for it. The words hung in the air between us. My brother Jake appeared at my mother's shoulder. You paid for it? Emma, what are you talking about? I arranged and paid for all of Grandpa's funeral arrangements. The viewing, the service, the reception, the burial plot, the military honors. Everything. My family exchanged glances. Emma, my mother said slowly, how could you possibly afford all this? Before I could answer, Danny appeared with his phone in his hand. Mom? Dad? You might want to see this. He showed them his phone screen. I could see it was a Google search result. I just looked up Emma Sterling Real Estate Development, and, wow. My mother took the phone, her eyes scanning the screen. Her face went white. Emma Sterling, CEO of Sterling Development Group, she read aloud. Net worth estimated at, Emma, this says $4.2 billion. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's voice was barely a whisper. 4.2 billion? That's just an estimate, I said. Forbes tends to be conservative. Jake grabbed the phone from my mother. Emma, this article says you own half the commercial real estate in the downtown district. It says Sterling Development Group is responsible for the Harbor View Towers, the Innovation District, the new medical complex. Among other projects. My mother sank into a nearby chair. The medical complex. The one they're building near Grandpa's old house. The James Mitchell Medical Center, I confirmed. It'll be finished next spring. My father was staring at me like I was a stranger. You named a medical center after your grandfather? He always talked about how the neighborhood needed better healthcare access. The center will provide free and low-cost services to veterans and seniors. Danny was still reading from his phone. Emma, there's an article here from last year about charitable giving. It says you donated over $30 million to various causes. It was a good year. My mother's voice was shaky. Emma, the past 3 years, when Grandpa was at Willowbrook, we thought Medicare was covering everything. Medicare doesn't cover Willowbrook, I said gently. Then how? I covered it. All of it. The monthly fees, the medical expenses, the private nurses, the experimental treatments. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Emma, my father said finally, why didn't you tell us? When you told me my little marketing job wasn't a real career. When you suggested I find a husband to take care of me. When you said I should be more like Jake because he has a stable job. The words landed like physical blows. We never meant. My mother started. Mom, you literally told me yesterday that I wasn't family enough to attend Grandpa's funeral. That's not what we meant. Then what did you mean? My family exchanged helpless glances. Danny broke the tension. Aunt Emma, can I ask you something? Of course. My tuition bills. For the past 2 years there's been this anonymous scholarship covering everything. Dad said it was need-based aid, but the financial aid office always seemed confused about it. I smiled at him. Grandpa was worried about your college costs. He wanted to help but didn't have the resources. So I made sure he didn't have to worry. Danny's eyes filled with tears. You paid for my college. Your grandfather would have if he could. I was just the vehicle. My mother was crying now. Emma, all this time, we thought you were struggling. We thought you needed our help. I never asked for help. But you drive that old Honda, you live in that small apartment. I like my car. And my apartment is perfect for my needs. Jake was scrolling through more articles on Danny's phone. Emma, it says here that you started your company 10 years ago with a $50,000 loan. From Grandpa, I confirmed. He mortgaged his house to give me the seed money. My father's face crumpled. He never told us. He never told you a lot of things. Like how proud he was of what I'd built. Like how he bragged to his friends about his granddaughter who was changing the skyline of the city. Emma, my mother whispered, we're so sorry. For what? For not seeing you. For not understanding what you were doing. For treating you like. Like what? Like you weren't successful. Like you weren't accomplished. Like you weren't. Enough. She nodded, unable to speak. I looked around at my family, really looked at them. My parents who'd worked hard to build middle-class lives and couldn't fathom success beyond their experience. My brother who'd followed the traditional path and assumed it was the only valid one. My nephew who was discovering that his quiet aunt was actually one of the most powerful people in the city. I have a proposition, I said finally. Everyone leaned in. We start over. You learn who I really am and I'll try to understand why you felt the need to protect me from a life you thought was too small. My father's voice was rough with emotion. Emma, I don't know how to make this right. You don't need to make anything right. You need to decide if you want a relationship with me based on who I actually am. My mother reached for my hand. We want that. We want to know you. The real you. I squeezed her hand gently. Then let's start with this. Grandpa knew exactly who I was. He was proud of what I'd built, proud of how I'd used the foundation he gave me. He never once made me feel like I needed to be different or smaller or less than what I was. He was a wise man, my father said quietly. He was. And he loved all of us even when we disappointed him. Danny wiped his eyes. Aunt Emma? Yes. Thank you. For everything. For Grandpa's care, for my school, for this memorial fund. But mostly for being here today even when I wasn't wanted? Even when we were too stupid to know how much we needed you here. I smiled through my own tears. That's what family does, Danny. We show up for each other even when it's hard. As the reception began to wind down, I found myself standing with Richard Blackwood near the windows overlooking the harbor. It was a beautiful service, Mrs. Sterling. Your grandfather would have been proud. I hope so. And the scholarship fund announcement. That was perfect. Very fitting. I watched my family across the room huddled together in deep conversation. Processing, I imagined the reality of who I really was. Richard, I want to add something to Grandpa's headstone. Of course. What would you like? Below his name and dates, I wanted to say. He saw potential where others saw problems, and believed in dreams when others saw only wishes. That's beautiful. It's what he did for me. What he did for everyone he loved. As I prepared to leave, my family approached as a group. Emma, my mother said, would you consider having dinner with us this week? All of us together. I'd like that. And, my father added hesitantly, maybe you could tell us about your work? Really tell us this time. I'd love to. Danny grinned. Can I bring my computer science textbooks? I have about 1,000,000 questions about development algorithms. Absolutely. As I walked toward the exit, I felt a hand on my arm. My brother Jake. Emma, wait. I turned. I owe you an apology. A real one. Not just for today but for years of not seeing you, not understanding what you were doing, not respecting your choices. Jake. No, let me finish. You've been quietly taking care of all of us, Grandpa, Danny, probably others we don't even know about, while we were treating you like the family failure. That's not just wrong, it's shameful. I squeezed his arm. We all do the best we can with what we understand at the time. You're more generous than I deserve. You're my brother. Generosity doesn't need to be deserved. As I drove home in my reliable Honda, I thought about the conversation ahead with my family. For the first time in years, they'd see me clearly, not as a disappointment or a project, but as someone who'd built something meaningful while honoring the foundation they'd given me. Grandpa had always said that the best legacy wasn't what you left behind, but what you built forward. Today we'd started building something new together, a family relationship based on truth, respect, and the understanding that love doesn't require anyone to be smaller than they are. And that, I thought as I pulled into my parking space, was exactly the kind of legacy Grandpa would have wanted. The funeral had ended, but our family was just beginning,